guys, welcome to MuscleCar. Our shop's looking a little empty around here, and that's because we've been pushing projects out the door left and right. Well, all this empty space left a little bit of a vacuum, and look what it sucked in.
This 70.5 RS Camaro is our next project. And no, we're not going overboard with it. We're getting back to the basics with a stock style build. No frills, just old school muscle is what we're after with this one.
It's been prowling the streets of California its entire life, and has survived pretty much unmolested. Yeah, it's had a bad repaint in a non-stock color and a reupholstering that smacks of the 80s, but otherwise, it's all original.
The RS option gives us the highly sought after split bumper front end, but since the Rally Sport package was only about looks, it doesn't have much to brag about under the hood. This stock 307 has given up the ghost, and since it wasn't really known for its performance, we're going a different direction. We know we want to stay stock because these cars look great straight out of the box, so we could do a numbers matching restoration, but a base 307 RS, well, they're just not all that desirable of a car.
When you ordered a brand new Camaro in 1970, you had a lot of options to choose from. So we're going to pretend like we have a factory order sheet and check off all of our favorite options. And when it's finished, it's going to look and drive just like it rolled off the showroom floor.
The biggest, baddest engine you could order was the optional L78, the 375 horse version of the 396. One problem, they were only available in the SS and only 600 of them rode off the assembly line.
Now, our Camaro is the basic RS, so we're going to be building a recreation of the rare RSSS L78 396. Add in the Z28 wheels, GM's lime-colored citrus green paint, and black SS stripes, and it's going to steal the show as Project Limelight.
The biggest change we need to make to transform this car is the engine. We found this 396 in the local classifieds. The reason we liked it is because it's complete and we may be able to reuse some of the brackets and accessories.
I'll tell you guys right up front, this isn't a 1970 motor. It's actually out of a 1972 GMC. That's all right, because we told you right up front this is not going to be a numbers matching restoration. But the block is identical to what would have come in our car from the factory. And that brings us to a little bit of interesting history on the 396.
Starting in 1970, all GM 396 big blocks were punched out to the 402. They kept the 396 badging on the smaller cars like the Camaro, Chevelles, and Novas because these engines had already earned a big reputation in the racing world.
Then to add to the confusion, they marketed the same engine in larger cars and trucks as a 400. Now nobody really knows for sure why GM did this, but rest assured, regardless of what the badging or the brochure says, if it's a 70 to 72, then it's actually a 402. With visions of big block power dancing in our heads, it's time to grab the tools and pull some parts. Here's the original color right there. That means that these bolts probably haven't been out since the car left the factory. Putting a wrench to a basically unrestored car has a way of bridging the years between you and Joe Lunchbox, who is putting together Camaros for a living. So most of this car still has the original hoses and clamps and everything on it. And that is why you pay a little extra money for a California car. No rust, stuff comes right apart.
Not much in the drivetrain department is going to be reused. Even the transmission's being swapped out for a manual. The wheels are good for rollers, but they'll be replaced with factory Z28 wheels.
You can handle that wheel? Oh, you got it? F-bodies are subframe cars, so the front clips were pre-assembled before being installed on the line. This means it's just as easy to remove it the same way. Now we've got easy access to pull the heavy chunks out. I think we had a broken motor mount. Hey guys, welcome back to MuscleCar. Now this isn't going to be the first facelift that this Camaro here has ever seen. According to the trim tag, she rolled off the assembly line in citrus green. And there's still quite a few places on the body where you can see the original paint has been hiding out for 40 plus years. And we knew that that color was going to be perfect for Project Limelight.
The The interior was originally dark green, but somebody's changed it to black. Neither one of those colors seemed exactly right, so we flipped through the option sheet and saw that the saddle color would look great with our green, and that means all this black stuff needs to go.
A lot of these interior parts are pretty easy to come by, but others, not so much. So we're tagging and bagging all of it. Now, many GM cars used a general assembly style, but as the saying goes, the devil's in the details. So take pictures if you don't have a photographic memory.
With the doors gutted and pulled, we can make short work of the interior. The seats will be rebuilt with new padding and covers, and most of the console will be refurbished too.
Pulling carpet can be a moment of truth. We don't know if we're going to uncover a pleasant surprise or a horrible nightmare.
Oh yeah, can't ask for no better than that. Shoot, yeah. It's a pretty good feeling. Usually when we pull this stuff up, pulling the floorboard up with it.
Man, I wish I looked this good at 40.
GM used non-hardening sealant to install the glass, which is good because it makes it easy to remove, but bad because it eventually leaks. Straight up.
Well, the teardown is almost done, and this right here is the worst spot that we found on the entire car. We knew it was there before we started on this thing because we could see it through the windshield. Nice thing is they make replacement panels for them, so it's no big deal. One more major area that's prone to rust is above the gas tank. There it is. A couple of bolts, and we'll see if our luck holds out. Well, the trunk floor looks every bit as solid as the floor pans. Looks like buying a California car has seriously paid off. Now, we still have a few more parts to pull off, but that rear end is staying put for now to keep it easier to roll around. But later on in the build, it is going to get replaced with an SS Correct 12-bolt posi.
Today on MuscleCar, Project Limelight shows off its birthday suit. Rick fixes some minor flaws, and Tommy shows how to update an old repair. Mercifully, he doesn't show his birthday suit. Plus, this old 402 has a story to tell. A horror story.
Hey guys, welcome to MuscleCar. It's not every day that you see 40-year-old sheet metal that's still in this good a condition. So you can imagine how stoked we were when we got our 1970 Camaro back from the blaster. Now this is what you hope for with a California car. I mean, look at these floorboards. These things look like they were just stamped out yesterday.
Overall, we got really lucky. The hood, deck lid, and doors only have a few minor dings. The fenders are by far the worst panels. We're going to have to weld in a few patch panels and rework a previous repair, and then we can get started on the bodywork.
Now, we like to think that we know cars pretty darn well around here, and after a thorough inspection of Project Limelight, she looked pretty solid. But some people will go through a lot of effort to cover up flaws, so you never really know what you got till you get her down to her birthday suit. And that's where Strip Masters comes in.
These guys don't do sandblasting. They do plastic media blasting, which is a lot less invasive than sand.
When you sandblast something, it does take a little bit of the metal off of the product. As the sand hitting the metal, it creates heat, maybe sometimes warping. With this plastic media, it doesn't heat up as much.
That means if you have soft parts like our Camaro grill shell here, they can be stripped without being damaged. And unlike soda blasting, it doesn't leave a residue that needs to be prepped before any primer or paint can go on.
Blow it off, get all that stuff off, and you're ready to paint.
Now, if we had a lot of body work to do, I'd go ahead and put primer on it now to keep all this bare metal from rusting. But honestly, there's just not much to do on this thing. So I'm going to buzz it down with 80 grit and knock out all the body work now, then prime the whole thing. I'll start by opening up the surface of the areas that need filler, so the repair will have a stronger bite. The plastic bead blasting doesn't remove rust, so I'll clean these small spots with the stripper wheel. Metal to metal filler is the best choice for high stress areas like the C-pillars. It's strong and stable, but hard to sand, so I'll finish it out later with standard plastic filler. Well, that area is ready to get cleaned off and have some plastic put on it. Now I'm going to straighten out some dents. There's a little crease that runs right through there, and for that, I need a stud gun. Matco's newest stud gun features a magnetic tip, so the stud won't fall out before you get it into place. Just pull the trigger, but not too long or you could warp the panel. Now I'm using studs right here because there's a wheel well right there, so I can't get at the back side of it. But you can see where this dent actually runs all the way down and ends clear down here, where this area I can get at from inside the trunk, so no studs required. A special slide hammer comes in the kit. It locks onto the studs, allowing you to pull the metal back into shape. Just go easy and move it a little at a time so you don't over pull and stretch the metal. Now I can move to the inside of the trunk to rough in the rest of the crease with the shaping hammer. Once it's close, I can cut the studs off and finish it all out with a hammer and dolly. Look right there where that real deep part was, it's almost completely gone. Well, that's probably close enough right there. I could prime it and block it out, but filler's a lot more stable than primer. So I'll do a little skim coat first and then prime the whole thing.
After the break, how to fix a common fender flaw. And later, Tommy's got the tear down blues.
While Rick's filling in the rest of the dents on the body, I'm gonna get started on the metal work. We're pretty sure the car was repainted in the mid-'80s. Back then, this drill and slide hammer type of repair was typical at most body shops. Nowadays, most pros would use a stud gun like Rick just showed you. That doesn't mean this type of repair is wrong. A lot of you guys out there are probably still doing it this way. The stud gun method does give cleaner, faster, better results. We want the best repair possible, so I'm gonna cut it out, patch in some new metal. Before I do any cutting, I need to get the shape of the surrounding metal back to where it's supposed to be. On something like a lip, you can eyeball it, but if this butted up against another panel, it would need to be in place to make sure the lines are right. I'm cutting out the old metal on the body line. This way I'll be making a flat patch instead of one with a complicated shape. I'll follow up the cutoff wheel with a 24 grit grinding disc to clean up the edges. The easiest way to make a patch is to use the old metal as a template. 18 gauge steel is pretty standard for body panels, so that's what I'm using for the patch. It's thin enough to be cut with a shear or snips if you don't have a bandsaw. With a patch that will be butt welded all the way around, it needs to fit very precise. This means taking off a little at a time and checking the fit a lot. I left the inside edge a little long when I cut this piece because I knew I would need some extra metal to form the new lip. Instead of using pliers, I made a simple tool out of 1/8 inch plate so I'd have a consistent bend all the way across this edge. And it worked perfectly. This piece fits like a glove. As I weld the patch in, I'll check the fitment as I go to make sure there's no low spots. Take your time, especially when welding in the center of a panel, and don't heat the metal up too much or it will end up warping, causing you a lot more work to fix it. Once it's welded all the way around, grind it off smooth with 24 grit. This next area is hands down the most common place to find rust. The lower fender behind the wheel. Dirt and moisture get trapped behind the inner brace and it's all downhill from there. These patch panels are available from year one for most muscle cars. They're pre-formed, so you just trim off what you don't need, weld them in. For now, we're only cutting out the obvious stuff. With layered panels, it's hard to know what lies underneath until you open it up, so we may end up cutting out more. Looks like we got rid of enough of the outer skin, but the inner brace will need some repair as well. So it's time for some more slicing and dicing. Just like before, the old piece is a template for the new. I'm using 16 gauge for this because the inner structure is a little thicker than the body panels. I'll use the brake to recreate the bend this piece needs, but a vise and a mallet would work too. Once it's trimmed and shaped to fit, you can weld it in and grind it down. Duplicolor's weld-through primer will work as a barrier to keep the rust from coming back. Our panel didn't include this mounting edge, so I fabbed up a simple piece that matches what we had to cut off. I'll cut the notch out when I do the final grinding. The great thing about using a preformed panel is you don't have to spend so much time shaping it for a good fit.
Coming up, got rust under glass? We'll show you how to fix it. And later, our engine reveals a dirty little secret.
Hey guys, welcome back. With the fenders patched and the majority of the bodywork done, there's just one more area that still needs to be repaired. These rusty corners here where the windshield meets the dash. Now we can get away with a couple of spot repairs, but classic cars are notorious for rotting out in this area. Now if you're not lucky enough to have an F-body as clean as ours, Year One offers a whole panel that runs from your dash all the way up to the firewall. Before I start cutting out the bad chunks, I'm going to remove the VIN tag to keep it from being damaged. All I have to do is grind down the two rivets, punch them out, and store the tag in a safe place so we can reinstall it later. I'm planning my cuts to avoid a brace that's underneath. I only want to cut through the top layer for now. Then I can see what part of the bottom layer has to be replaced. Now here you can see on the back side of this piece, that's why I only cut it back as far as I did. The sheet metal from there on over is still good, so why chop it out? With all the rust uncovered, I'll use a strip and clean disc to get all the flakes out of the way so I can see exactly what I've got before cutting out any more metal. I'll make a simple template out of cardboard so my patch will be as accurate as possible. That'll work. Now this patch is just small enough that I'm not going to bother with the bandsaw. I'll just use the snips to cut it out by hand. I attached a stud to help hold the patch in place, and I'll slice it off as soon as it's welded in. With inner structure repaired, I can move on to the outer skin. Now this area is too complicated to make in one piece, so I'll break it into two patches. For a patch like this, you really don't need any fancy equipment. Snips, a hammer, and a vise will do everything you need. Now, once you have a good fit, seal up the area with some weld-through primer, and you can weld in the new pieces. The nice thing about doing it this way is that when you're done, you still have all the factory spot welds. No one will ever know that that's been repaired.
Up next, Dr. Tom examines our 402.
Oh no, that's not good.
Hey, welcome back. Believe it or not, the sheet metal and bodywork on this thing are done. And before we know it, it's going to be ready for a new drivetrain. So while I get this thing sealed up with some primer, Tom is going to crack open our 396 and see what we got.
Like we've said before, this engine is actually out of a 72 GMC, but that's okay because we're not building a numbers matching car. Any 402 block will do. And remember, starting in 70, any Chevrolet style big block sold as a 396 or 400 is actually a 402. The brackets and accessories for our Camaro are different from a truck, so we won't be reusing most of these parts, but they're still valuable, so we're going to keep everything together for the next guy to use. All these parts can be refurbished and are number stamped, so if you're doing a numbers matching restoration, hang on to every little piece. Most harmonic balancers are press fit, so have a puller ready. Our Matco set made this job easy. L78s came with a Holly, not a Q-Jet, so this one's going somewhere else. It's always a good idea to get the big chunks out of the way before you pop the intake off, so nothing falls into the block. Well, I think we found a miss. A big hunk of crud in here. Yeah, this thing looks like it's cooked a cam bearing or something out in it. It's not a good sign. Now, engines may not really be able to talk, but they sure can tell a story if you know what to look for. Pay attention to each and every part as you tear it down. They could be trying to tell you something important. Well, it looks like that's where our bearing fragment came from. That piston's hitting the head. Ooh, not a good sign. Oh no, that's not good. And here comes the jelly. This thing's had some water in it. Maybe it's not that big of a deal. Maybe a big deal. Yeah, here comes the good oil now. Yeah, that's gross. Well, from the beginning of the teardown, we've had a few signs that weren't in our favor. Push rod out of place, well, the thing may have been over revved or a lot of miles. Flakes in the lifter valley, it's not that big a deal, we planned on rebuilding it anyhow. Water in the oil pan, not a big deal either because it probably just got wet at some time. Well, then I started trying to take the oil pan off. Something on the inside wanted out in a bad kind of way. So I'm pretty sure we're gonna find some metal where it's not supposed to be. You may have been wondering why I didn't roll the motor over to take the oil pan off. Reason being is because when you're tearing the motor down you don't know nothing about, this keeps the story in the pan. So let's see what we can find. Yeah, that's not good. Oh, there's two. That looks like a rod. Man, there's some big chunks off in here. Ooh, big chunk. Yeah, right there. Broke piston. Looks like that's our problem. Like it's broke the bottom of that piston and smoked the other rod bearing. Yep, no rod bearing in sight. Looks like it's had its feelings hurt. Ain't much of that thing left. Ooh, yeah, this thing's pretty trashed. Yeah, Rick's gotta see this. We got a decision we gotta make. Hey brother, come here a minute. Got good news and we got bad.
You got a bad look on your face.
Good news is that I've tore the engine down and kept your hands clean the whole time.
Uh-huh.
Bad news is we've got two giant coolant holes inside the cylinder wall. What do you think about that?
Whoa, dude.
Yeah.
Time to bore it and sleeve it.
Yeah, I don't even know if that's repairable. Probably need to give the machine shop a call and see what they have to say.
Even if they sleeve it, they're still gonna have to Magnaflex it. Who knows how far the cracks go, man. Tell you what, I'll check around and see what else I can come up with.
All right, brother. Well, I carried our block down to the machine shop and I got some good news. Our busted cylinder can be sleeved and it's only gonna cost a little over $100 more than we were gonna spend anyways. So that means we're right on track.
Now, all our metal work is done and the body and most of the panels are in first prime and really looking nice. If you guys have any questions about product used on the show, you can check it out at powerblock.tv.com. Now we're going to get all this stuff blocked out in final prime. Then we'll be ready to swap out the suspension, brakes, and rear end. But for this week, we're out of time. So until next time, we're out of here. Hey guys, welcome to MuscleCar. Project Limelight is back in the shop for the next step in the transformation from a basic bare bones RS into a full-blown big block SS.
Today we're going to replace the old suspension, steering, and brakes, and to go with that 396 that's dropping in, we plan to upgrade the rear axle to a 12-bolt. Since this is a stock style build, we plan to use parts that look as close to the originals as we can.
We picked up this 70 RS Camaro in California, hoping that it would be a solid foundation. And boy, did it pay off. The floorboards look almost new.
We blew it apart and pulled out the old 307 to make way for the 396 we're going to rebuild.
After having it blasted, we took care of some sheet metal damage, patched in a rust spot, then got the body ready for the first coat of primer. With all the bodywork roughed in, it's time to turn our attention to suspension. First, we need to strip the subframe down to its bones, just like a Thanksgiving Day turkey.
A lot of these parts will be replaced or upgraded, but some of the hardware will be reused, so we'll keep it all organized. Once the subframe is bare, only 4 bolts have to come out to separate it from the body for cleanup and paint.
The original control arms were blasted, painted, and had new stock bushings and ball joints pressed in, so they're ready to bolt back in place. We removed the old small block mounts earlier to make way for these shorter big block mounts. And next up are the coil springs. There's more to installing these things than just bolting them in. They need to be compressed, but without the weight of the engine and the rest of the car to help us, we're going to need a specialty tool, and that's where a spring compressor comes in. Now, this isn't a tool that most guys are likely to have laying around the shop. In fact, we don't even have one. We rented this one from a local auto parts store. Just make sure to ask them for an internal compressor if your springs install into the frame like these. The safest way to use this tool is to preload the spring using a hand ratchet. Then you can finish the job with an air ratchet. Don't use an impact. You can damage the tool and even cause serious injury. Now, once it's compressed enough to fit, slide it into the spring pocket and use a jack to support the control arm while the spindle is bolted in place. If you don't like the idea of compressing the springs yourself, you can take them to a shop and have them banded. Then just cut the bands off once the spindle is bolted to the A-arm. Before you remove the tool, make sure the springs are seated into the pockets correctly. Otherwise, you'll have to repeat this whole procedure. We're replacing the standard shocks with GM's heavy-duty versions from year 1. These are correct ones for our F41 suspension upgrade.
We rebuilt our original steering box, so it's going right back where it came from. For a video clip detailing this rebuild, visit the MuscleCar page of PowerBlockTV.com. Now we can start tying the 2 sides together, starting with the idler arm, which is hooked to the steering box by the center link. The outer tie rod ends connect to the spindle, and the inner tie rod ends connect to the center link. This front steer setup marks a big improvement over the first gen's rear steer.
Hey guys, welcome back. When you're doing a stock restoration, well, sometimes you have to make a decision between exact originals or close reproductions. Now, if you're doing a chalk mark numbers matching kind of build, well, then it's obvious. You have to go with the exact correct parts. But if you're going with a driver style build like we are with Limelight, well, compromise can be good. Take the brake rotors, for example. The originals have a wear indicator groove and part numbers cast right in, whereas the repops don't. But we'd really rather not use the original because it could be warped, cracked. I mean, honestly, who knows? So we're going to go with a safer alternative and use the aftermarket one, even if it's not quite exactly correct.
Hey, cuz, to keep your hands clean, I can take care of the bearings.
Oh, cool. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. I'll go get the sway bar ready to go.
Good deal. I've shown you before how to pack bearings the old-fashioned way, but today I'm going to get it done without the mess with a Matco bearing packer. With the reservoir full of royal purple bearing grease, all I have to do is drop in a bearing face down and press on the plunger. Check to make sure you can see the grease oozing through all the gaps. Then you know it's ready to go in the rotor. Gently tap in the seal, flip it over, and fill the hub with some more grease. Drop in the outer bearing and the rotor is ready to install. When installing new wheel bearings, it's important to set the preload, or you may end up having to replace them again. You set them too tight, they'll build heat and burn up. Too loose, they'll move around on the spindle, tearing themselves apart. With the rotor set in place on the spindle, wrench it down good and tight to set the bearing on the shaft. Back off the nut about a half turn, then snug it back down, making sure the rotor can be turned by hand. And don't forget the cotter pin and the grease cap. Before I finish up by installing the caliper, I'm going to clean the braking surface with some cleaner. New rotors are shipped with a waxy coating, and if you don't remove it, it can clog up your pads. A couple of swipes is all it takes. Then I can drop on the caliper.
And the last piece we're going to add to the front end is a sway bar. Now, most Camaros came from the factory with a 15/16 bar, but if you ordered a big block, then you got the F41 suspension package along with a much beefier 1¼ bar. It uses the same mounting holes, and the bushings will even fit the original brackets. Installing a sway bar is pretty straightforward. If you're doing this by yourself, a jack comes in handy for some extra support. Greasing the bar or bushings before they go on will prevent squeaks. Use the jack to raise the bar into position, then tighten the bolts a few turns just to hold everything in place. We'll leave all the bolts loose until the car is at right height to prevent binding.
Hey, welcome back to MuscleCar. Earlier in the show, we got our front end assembled to our subframe, but before we can bolt it under the car, we've got to get some paint on the undercarriage.
And that means it's time for the old rear end to come out. And when you're pulling heavy parts off a vehicle that's being supported like this, make sure you keep your weight balance in mind. If you pull off a heavy part like a front subframe, it's going to make the vehicle tail heavy. So you're either going to have to support the back end or add weight to the nose, like we did.
Since we're replacing everything, it's easiest just to pull it all out in one big chunk. All we have to do is unbolt the leaf springs, shocks, and brake line, and the whole assembly drops right out.
So back. Got it. The undercarriage of a car is an area that most people don't really put a lot of thought into, but a true rebuild isn't complete without giving it some attention. Now, this car came from the factory with a lacquer-based sealer primer. We could roll it into the booth and reapply it, but I know of an easier, cheaper alternative.
Build on a budget. MuscleCar projects that save you time and money.
Enamel-based aerosol is going to give us a look that's very close to the original. Duplicolor's semi-gloss engine enamel is perfect for this job. It's tough, washable, heat-resistant, and it's going to give us the look we're after. But first, we got to do some cleanup. 40 years of grunge needs to hit the floor before we can even think about paint. No high-tech tools here, just scrapers, cleaner, and a whole bunch of elbow grease.
Tell you what, guys, if you can do this outside with a pressure washer, I would highly recommend it. Doing it inside on the lift took longer since we had to use pump sprayers. Not to mention, it made a real mess that we had to clean up later.
It's important to get the moisture out of all the nooks and crannies.
Wow, there's a bunch of stuff.
By either using compressed air or a lot of drying time.
Next, we'll hit the bare metal spots with some Duplicolor etch primer. It'll help the top coat adhere better. Once it's all prepped and etched, we can beautify it with the semi-gloss enamel.
One of the reasons we chose this product is it covers really quick. We shot the entire undercarriage with a single coat, and you can see what a difference it makes.
The original rear end that we pulled out earlier was just a standard GM 10-bolt, which isn't a bad rear end, but we're going to go one step better with a 12-bolt. Now, 1970 was the only year of the second gen that this option was available, and it was only available on the SS's and the Z28s, so they're not easy to come by.
But we didn't have to look far, because Mosier Engineering sent us their 12-bolt muscle pack. It's a complete rear end assembly with brakes and model-specific purchase already installed, so all you have to do is pick your options and bolt it in.
Attaching the leaf springs to the front mounts before the axle goes in makes installation a whole lot easier. Now, our Rally Sport came from the factory with standard springs, but the performance package calls for heavy-duty ones, so year one hooked us up with the correct set. Now, we had some options when we ordered up our Mosier muscle pack, including gear ratios and brakes. Now, they do have some great disc brake packages, but in 1970, Camaros only came with drum brakes, so we ordered up stock replacements.
They also offer a wide range of gear ratios. A 70 SS could have been ordered with a 410, but we wanted this thing a little more streetable, so we went with the 355s, which was standard on the SS. After bolting the leaf springs into the shackles, we can adjust the position of the rear end over the springs.
Pretty good right there, Rick. If you want to come on up with it. Pretty good on my side too. You ready?
Yep.
If you're doing this on your garage floor, you'd lower the rear end onto the springs. But since we're working on a lift, we'll raise the car to the rear end. Once it's in place, we can cinch it all down with new U-bolts, making sure to install our new pads and sway bar mounts. Now it's ready for the rear sway bar. Everything we need to install the Moser muscle pack, including shocks, sway bar, and all the hardware, came straight from year one.
Since our Camaro didn't come with a sway bar, we need to add a couple of holes in the frame rails to finish the install. With the rear suspension done, all we need is some wheels and a subframe bolted back under, and we'll have us a roller ready for a big block.
The completed front clip goes on just as easy as it came off, with 4 bolts, some Loctite thread locker, and a new set of body bushings.
We've made a lot of progress on Project Limelight today. Now we've got a completely rebuilt front end, a 12-bolt rear, upgraded springs and sway bars, and not to mention a great looking bottom side. Now we can put together that L78 big block, but we're all out of time for today. So until next time, y'all keep it between the ditches.
Today on MuscleCar, Project Limelight's power plant comes together. Learn how a block is sleeved, and Tommy gives some assembly tips that apply to almost any engine. Plus, Rick shows how to convert from an automatic to a 4-speed.
Hey guys, welcome to MuscleCar. This super clean second-gen Camaro that we call Project Limelight is coming right along, and quick. We've already straightened out a few dings and rust spots and laid down the first coat of primer. Then we got busy on the front suspension and rear end.
We upgraded a big block style springs and sway bars and strapped in a 12-bolt. But we didn't do all that just to put in that puny little 307 this car came with. We're going with the biggest, baddest engine you could get in these cars, the 375 horse L78.
We picked up a 1972 GMC 402 because it's basically the same block you'd find in any Chevy badged as a 396 in the early 70s. Unfortunately, our dream of finding a block as clean as our Camaro body fell apart when we tore the engine down.
We've got 2 giant coolant holes inside the cylinder wall.
Whoa, dude.
Yeah, we'll probably need to give the machine shop a call and see what they have to say. And that's exactly what we did. The experts at Huntsville Engine and Performance gave the green light for sleeving and had some good info to share. Well, I want to thank you for helping us out with our 396 402 build, man, but when we tore this thing down, we wasn't even sure if this block was repairable.
Well, in this instance right here, it may look bad, but it's not as bad as it seems. This crack and this hole actually doesn't go all the way to the deck surface or to the main webbing, so we can put a sleeve in this at any time.
Does this type of repair devalue the block in any way?
Well, obviously it's a repaired block, but in this circumstance where you guys are going to be using this block, it beats throwing it in the garbage. And a lot of guys have to do this kind of stuff on something that's got personal meaning or a collector's item or matching numbers.
Right, that makes sense. Because otherwise it would just be a piece of scrap iron.
Boat anchor,
yeah.
That's right.
Before any metal is carved out, the boring machine is set within a thousandth of an inch of what's needed for the sleeve to fit. Boring it out takes several passes, shaving a tiny amount of metal each time. Any single part of the process can make or break your engine, so be sure to deal with somebody that's got a good track record. The wall isn't bored all the way into the crankcase. Instead, there's a little bit of a lip left for the sleeve to rest on. The sleeve itself fits very tightly, so it's got to be sweet-talked into the hole with a little gentle persuasion. Once the sleeve is seated, the top is taken down near to deck height. We're done knocking metal out of the cylinder for now, so we're moving on to the line bore machine. The idea behind this is to return the crank journals to the proper alignment, which could have been thrown off during the installation of the sleeve. We're also having our block decked to give it an even surface, which ensures a good head gasket seal. After a couple passes, you can start to see the high and low spots. A couple more passes, and there you go, no more holes. Man, that looks pretty good. What else do you like?
You just need to cut your valve release in it and bore and hone your rest of your cylinders, and you can come get her.
Well, I guess I'm going to see you in a couple weeks. It's better work for you.
That'll be wonderful.
Appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
See you then.
All right.
Well, our block is all done. The valve relief in the cylinder that's been sleeved has been ground out to match all the others. Most blocks don't require this relief, but the valve train design of a big block Chevy is kind of unusual and needed that extra clearance.
Sweet, man. Looks like you're ready for some reassembly there, huh?
Yep.
Cool. Well, that's my cue to stay out of your way and go finish some priming and blocking. So if you need a hand, yell.
All right, dude, I'll do it. Cool.
Up next, how to get your bottom end in top shape. Plus, Rick makes a fashion statement.
Hey, welcome back. There are hundreds of different block designs, but when doing an assembly, most of the process is pretty much the same no matter what kind of engine you're building. Today, when I'm putting together our 402, I'm going to give some in-depth info on a few steps that can apply to any engine. If you decided not to have the machine shop assemble the bottom end, or if you're just planning a re-ring and swapping out the bearings, you need to measure for main bearing clearance. To do this, you need a micrometer and a dial bore gauge. First, I'm measuring the diameter of the journals using my micrometer from Powerhouse Products. To get the correct measurement, slide the tool back and forth until it tightly fits across the journal. Now we're using a 2 to 3 inch micrometer, so we know we're at 2 inches. Each one of these little marks equals 25 thousandths, so that's 700 and almost 50. So since we're one shy, that's 2.749. Repeat the process for all 5 journals. With a quality crank, the number should be the same except for the rearmost journal, which will be slightly smaller to compensate for crankshaft thrust. Next, drop in the main bearings and install the caps. I'm not using any lube yet because it's all got to come back apart again once it's measured. We're using ARP bolts throughout this build, along with their Ultra Torque assembly lube. It prevents seizing and maintains a more consistent preload on your bolts. I'm following the same torque sequence I'll be using later for the actual installation. To calibrate my dial bore gauge, I'll set it to the diameter of the first journal, using the measurement I took earlier. Then I can use my gauge to check the clearances, making a note of the variance of each one. Each engine has its own range of acceptable tolerances for bearing clearance, so make sure you've researched what your application calls for. Well, our bearing clearance is checked out. The front's right about 24, the middle 3's 25, 26, and the rear's at 29. Perfect for what we're doing. So I'm going to go ahead and remove the main cap so I can install the crankshaft. Never assemble an engine with plain motor oil, or you'll burn up the bearings. Royal Purple Max Tough Assembly Lube is designed to break in an engine without damage. Once you've hit all the main bearings, don't forget about the thrust bearing surface. Now we can drop in our Eagle crank, making sure not to damage the bearings by bumping them or sitting the crank in at an angle. The main caps are next with plenty of lube. They gotta go on in the correct order, which should have been marked on disassembly. I've offset the sealing joint of the rear main to prevent leaks. A few dabs of Loctite silicone will provide some extra insurance. Following the recommended torque sequence, I'll tighten the main bolts down in 3 stages for proper cap alignment. Now with the front 4 mains torque, the next step is to true the thrust bearing, which is a pretty simple procedure. All you've got to do is hold the crank in one direction, drive it that way, hold it in the opposite, drive it back, and then torque the main cap. That's it. One last tolerance I need to check is thrust clearance. First, I'll zero out our Matco magnetic dial gauge, then check to make sure the forward to rear movement of the crankshaft is within spec. Now our thrust clearance checks out, but if yours is a little bit too tight, it's not that big of an issue to fix. All you need is a piece of glass like this picture frame I found in Rick's office, a piece of sandpaper, then simply take the bearing, lay it on top of it, sand it a few times, flip it over, then reinstall the bearing, torque it down to specs, and recheck it. It's that simple.
Coming up, more engine assembly tips than you can shake a stick at. And later, a marriage that's made to last.
Hey, welcome back. Today we're assembling our Chevy 402, and with the crank in place, it's time to install the pistons. We could have ordered a standard set of 30 over rings, but since this is more of a performance build, we decided to go with a file fit ring for a better seal. The formula for figuring out gaps for a street engine is easy. Just plug your bore diameter into these equations, and that will tell you what your ring gaps should be. Insert a ring into the cylinder, then use a squaring tool to make sure it's properly aligned. Check the gap with a feeler gauge that matches the clearance you need. It probably won't fit at this point. Pull the ring out and make a couple passes with a ring gap file. Only take off a little bit each time because you can't put it back on. Check it again with the feeler gauge. The fit is right when there's just a slight drag on the gauge. Once you get the ring set at the gap that you're looking for, you need to deburr the ring to keep it from gouging into the cylinder or the piston. It's pretty easy. All you need is a little honing stone or a file and carefully smooth out all the rough edges. So once you get it deburred, I like to put the ring back into the same cylinder that it came out of to keep up with which ring fits what cylinder. I went ahead and gapped the rest of our rings and installed most of the pistons. This is a long process, so make sure to stay organized because you want to install the correct ring in the cylinder that we're gapped for and onto the piston in the right order. When installing rings, always work from the bottom of the piston to the top, starting with the oil rings. For compression rings, an installation tool reduces the risk of gouging a piston or breaking a ring. Use plenty of regular motor oil, not assembly lube here, or you could cause ring failure. Get it in every ring groove and don't forget the wrist pins. Switch back to the royal purple lube for the rod bearings, then drop on a ring compression tool and the pistons are ready to install. With our setup of Eagle cranking rods, ARP bolts, Icon pistons, and Hastings rings, we'll have a rock solid bottom end that will allow us to push our L78 to redline with confidence. A few gentle taps with a soft hammer should be enough to ease it into the cylinder. Take your time and be careful not to nick the crank with the rod end. I'm running the rod bolts down just until they're snug, then I'll torque them down to specs. Another thing to check is the clearance between the two rods. Eagle recommends 15 to 25 on the steel rods, and we're at 16, so we're all good. Since this is a stock L78 build, we gotta go with a cast iron head. Summit's got exactly what we need with their big block Chevy replacement heads. They'll have the stock look with the added performance and aftermarket head offers. These Fel-Pro head gaskets came with a kit that includes all the gaskets needed for an entire build. ARP's thread sealer will prevent any leaks from the water jacket, and with a dab of ARP Ultra Torque on the bolt heads, they're ready to tighten. Comp Cams offers the factory grind we need for the L78. All we need to do is lube it up and slip it in. Comp also set us up with a complete timing set. The crank sprocket is pressed on first, followed by the cam sprocket and chain. After the bolts are tightened, bend the tabs on the retainer to keep them from backing out. Our comp lifter's got a dip in motor oil before being dropped into place, followed by the push rods. Now we've showed you how to adjust the lifters on a hydraulic camshaft like on Blue Collar Buick, but our L78's a little different. It's got a solid lift cam. Set a rocker on its stud, give it a few squirts of motor oil, and tighten down the nut. Adjust the lash until the correct feeler gauge fits tightly.
All right, man, I got all the panels ready for paint. Thought I'd come out here and give you a hand, but it looks like you about got it covered.
Yeah, I just about got it done. This thing will be ready for that 4-speed real soon.
Cool, I'll go get some parts together.
Sounds good.
Hey guys, welcome back. In converting our 1970 Camaro from an automatic to a 4-speed, well, we did have a couple of challenges. One of which was finding an original Muncie gearbox. Well, it took a little searching around, but we did come up with a good rebuilt unit. Next is finding a stock appearing bell housing, clutch linkage, and pedal assembly. Well, American Powertrain is your one-stop shop for all this stuff. Their bell housing is an exact replica of the original GM part, right down to the casting numbers. The difference is where you can't see it. These are made out of a high titanium alloy that resists cracking from high torque. We're stuffing American Powertrain's Science Friction billet steel flywheel
and triple grip clutch inside. We chose this clutch for its unique design. These separate rings of Kevlar and Ferramix mean it can handle all the torque we'll throw at it. These guys also supply everything else needed to make this conversion work, including 1970 replica pedals. There's two ways of doing this. You can bolt the bell house into the motor first, then bolt up the transmission, or you can do it this way and bolt the bell house into the transmission and install it as a unit. A dab of grease on the pilot shaft will help the throw-up bearing move easy. Then you can snap in the clutch fork. The rubber boot will help keep dust and grease away from the clutch.
Hey fella, I got the big block all put together. You ready to bolt on that 4-speed?
Nice, I got everything ready to rock.
Good deal, man. I'm gonna go take a short break.
The pilot bearing needs to be pressed into the back of the crank. Its job is to support the input shaft in the transmission. Next up comes the flywheel. After lining up the bolt holes, some gentle persuasion will seat it onto the crank. Be sure to use red Loctite thread locker on all these bolts, because you do not want these things coming loose. After torquing down the flywheel bolts, the clutch goes on using the alignment tool included in the kit. Top it off with the pressure plate, using more Loctite thread locker on the bolts. Now once it's all torqued down, you can pull the alignment tool out and bolt up the transmission.
How are we looking up there?
Yeah, I think we're looking pretty good. Make sure the splines on the input shaft slide into the splines on the clutch disc before you run any bolts into the block, or you could damage the transmission, clutch disc, or both. With the engine and transmission married, we can drop the newlyweds into the subframe. Aww.
Right there.
Since we're using all factory parts, it goes together with no problems. Well guys, we are well on our way at converting our 1970 RS Camaro into a ground-pounding RS SS. All the major components are in place. An L78 Spec 396, Muncie transmission, upgraded front suspension, and 12-bolt rear end. If you have any questions about anything we've used on the show today, check it out at powerblock.tv.com.
The bodywork's all done and it's sitting in final primer, so it's ready for some paint. But we're all out of time for this week, so until next week, y'all keep it between the ditches.
Today on MuscleCar, it's a lime, it's a pickle, no, it's Project Limelight. We're turning back the clock on our Camaro to 1970 with a groovy green paint job. Tommy shows how to refurb a set of steel wheels and stainless trim. Plus, Rick lays down a set of Z28 stripes.
Hey, welcome to MuscleCar. Project Limelight is taking a huge step toward living up to her name. Today she's going to get a few coats of citrus green, which is not only a factory color for a 70 Camaro, but it's the original color of this car.
Now we've already taken care of the little bit of sheet metal and bodywork. Then we went 2 rounds with the priming and blocking, followed that up with a final wet sand of 400 grit. And now she's ready for paint.
We've masked this car really thoroughly to prevent overspray, and even mask it to the floor to keep our freshly painted undercarriage looking good.
Now if we were doing a chalk mark restoration, then we'd actually want some overspray underneath, because from the factory, these things were not exactly perfect. They had visible overspray in areas like the sides of the cowl and pretty much the whole underside of things. But we're going for a cleaner look, so we got all that stuff covered up.
Well, y'all may have noticed that I'm on the injured list today. Working on cars is a pretty serious business with all the cutting and grinding and such. Well, you wouldn't think masking up a car is all that serious of a hazard. Well, I proved that wrong. Masking the roof off, I pulled a clip off and bashed my hand against this pinch weld. And I'm here to tell you, 9 stitches later, y'all pay attention to what you're doing in the shop, always.
Now before the color goes on, I'm going to lay down a coat of sealer. Now some guys think that this is kind of a wasted step, but it does serve several different purposes. It helps fill in any scratches left over from your final blocking. It creates a barrier between all of your bodywork and your top coat. It gives you a nice even color to lay your base coat down on, and it helps your base coat stick better. I'll use my Iwata base coat gun that I got from PowerToolbox.net to spray the sealer. I'm not going to use a primer gun because primer guns have a lot larger orifice to move thicker material. Well, sealer is only slightly thicker than base coat, so I can go ahead and use the same gun. The fluid tip used for primer also requires a different air cap to break up the larger volume of liquid, so make sure to use the right gun for the material you're spraying. Check out the full Iwata line at PowerToolbox.net. Sealer comes in many different shades, but grays are more easily covered by the base coat. Make sure to pick one the same tone as your base color. This green gray will be a good match for the citrus green going over it. I'm spraying the fenders at the same time as the body to help ensure a match. Any change in temperature or humidity can cause a color variance, especially in metallics, so it's a good idea to paint as much at one time as you can. This is why the doors and deck lid have already been mounted to the car. Of course, you still need room to move around without bumping into your wet panels, so don't pack in too much. The hood and nose pieces will be done in a separate batch. Now, picking a color for Project Limelight was easy because we really liked the factory color that was on it, citrus green. All we had to do was check the trim tag for the color code and give Auto Body Color and Supply a call. Now, trim tags can usually be found on the firewall, cowl, or radiator support, sometimes on the driver's side door jamb, so you might have to look around a little bit. If you're trying to match an existing paint job and don't know the code, take a panel with you to your paint supplier and they can mix up a custom match. Or if you don't know what you want, ask for a color chip book and browse until you find one you like. Always spray with the gun perpendicular to the surface and keep the overlap pattern very consistent, especially with metallics, or you could get stripes and splotchiness. 3 full coats go down first, then a light dust coat. That will ensure the metallic color looks even.
Coming up, Rick adds some more shine to Limelight, and later Tommy does some shining of his own.
Hey guys, welcome back. With all the base coat down on Project Limelight, we can go one of two ways. If you're adding graphics to a car like stripes, you can either put them under the clear, which means I'd have to spray them now, or you can go ahead and spray the clear now and add the graphics last. On Limelight, I'm going to be laying the stripes down over the top of the clear, and I'm doing this for a couple of reasons. First of all, when these cars were originally built, they didn't have any clear coat. They were all shot in single stage. Second reason is these are actually Z28 stripes. If you wanted them on an SS, well, the dealer had to add them later. If you're doing your graphics under the clear, then make sure the panels are correctly aligned, either on the car or on a rack, before laying the graphics out. Now, just like base coat, keep the pattern consistent with about 50% overlap. Pay attention to how it's acting as it hits the surface, and adjust your technique as you go. We painted the panels, ran everything through a bake cycle, and let it dry for a day. So we're ready for assembly. If your booth doesn't have a bake cycle, wait at least a couple of days before handling the parts. We'll tackle the front clip first. Now, the factory assembled it off the car and then dropped the whole thing on as a unit. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, they had a specialized jig to set all the parts on without running the risk of banging anything up.
We don't have one of those specialized jigs, so we'll be doing this the old-fashioned way, piece by piece, starting with the core support. Everything is built off this piece, so leave it a little loose to allow for adjustment as the front clip goes together. The inner fenders need to go on either before or with the fenders. Don't try to jam them in after the fenders are mounted. Assembling a car is a lot like putting together a puzzle. Parts need to go on in a specific order. If you get it wrong, you're going to waste a whole lot of time having to redo it. A parts assembly manual cuts out all the guesswork. Year One offers these for most muscle cars, and trust me, they're worth every red cent.
Now, assembly is also made easier with a master body kit. If you're doing a chalk mark type restoration, well, odds are you're going to be reusing some of your original hardware. But if the stuff is damaged, it's going to have to be replaced regardless. Now, this kit from Year One comes with everything pre-bagged and tagged. That way, there's no searching around to try to find what you need. This is where working with an all-original car really saves a lot of frustration. These pieces are already familiar with each other, so we're just reuniting old friends with the help of some new hardware.
At this point, the front clip is just about finished, but the core support and inner fender bolts are still loose to allow final fitment of the hood. Once the hood and fenders are square and aligned, we'll tighten them all up. All good over here?
That doesn't look bad.
Trained professional. Okay.
Yeah, we got this.
Up next, turn your old steel wheels from that ain't right to out of sight. And later, Rick earns his stripes.
Hey, welcome back to MuscleCar. Now that we got the body painted and looking great, we can turn our attention to the wheels. Our car came with 14-inch rallies, and that doesn't exactly scream performance, so we're upgrading to the Z28 wheels. We'll gain an inch in diameter and an inch in width, so that means we'll get a lot more rubber to the road.
Build on a budget. MuscleCar projects that save you time and money.
You can buy repops, but we're going to show you how to refurbish an original set. Painted steel wheels with stainless trim are really common with muscle cars, so this process can be applied to more than just these Z28 wheels. Factory wheels are coated just like engine blocks. If you want to identify a set, check for the size and date stamp on the rim. Some are also coated near the valve stem hole. Z28s used this style wheel from 70 to 81. The earlier ones were painted gray and had an oval valve stem hole. The 77 ups were painted body color and had a round valve stem hole. These don't have the oval that we'd like to have, but painted gray, they'll be plenty good enough for our build. The first thing we need to do is straighten out the lip. A flat spot here and there is okay, but make sure the wheels aren't warped. If you have doubts, take them to a tire shop and have them checked. Next, smooth out any gouges or nicks. Use a metal file instead of a grinder to prevent scratches. Don't remove too much, just knock down the rough edges. Doing this step before blasting will leave a nice, even surface. You could try to chemically strip these, but believe me, it's worth a few extra bucks it will cost to have them blasted. I'm using glazing putty to fill in any nicks and scrapes. Once it's dry, sand it with coarse grit paper, like 80 or 120. Move to 180 or 220 grit to shape it, then smooth off the scratches with 320 or 400. I've got about 4 hours invested in these, and it's amazing how much better they look just getting the old paint off of them. DP primer's up next, which is the same stuff we used on the body. You can get good results out of a spray can, just be sure to use an etch primer for better adhesion. After blowing them off, wiping them down, and giving them a quick once-over with a tack cloth, I can get to spraying. I'm doing the backside first, then I'll flip them over and cover the rest. I'll give them 2 coats for a good barrier against rust. Early 70s Z28 wheels used a specific paint formula. That original lacquer is no longer available, so I gave our buddies a call out at Auto Body Color and Supply, and they hooked us up with a formula to match that original flat gray. The new formulation is a urethane base coat, just like we used on the car. After 2 coats of base, I'll let it dry for about 15 minutes, then lay on 2 coats of semi-gloss clear. Nothing ruins a good-looking set of wheels worse than some scuffed up, dented up trim rings and center caps. If you can't find replacements, or if your originals aren't messed up too bad, you might try fixing them up. This process works for all kinds of stainless trim, as long as you can get to the backside of the damaged area. Work slowly and gently, using a hammer with a tip that matches the size and shape of the area you're fixing. I'm using a metal file to find the low spots, not to remove any metal. Just skim it over the surface and you'll see what still needs work. You'll probably go through this process of hammering and filing several times to get the shape just right. Sand it with 180 grit, followed by some 320 to get rid of the scratches left by the file before it's polished. The next step is to buff out the tiny scratches left over from the sandpaper. This buffing kit from Summit Racing comes with all the compounds to shine up just about any type of metal on a car, from copper and chrome to steel and aluminum. You can even shine up plastic, and the buffing wheels that come in the kit will fit any shop grinder. Apply the compound to the wheel, not the trim, and make sure to wear gloves, because these things can grab the trim right out of your hand, which has been known to lead to trips to the ER. Let the wheel run over the entire surface. If you've done everything right, they should polish to a shine really quick. I'll get the emblems glued to the center and they'll be as good as new.
After the break, learn how to lay down some lines.
Hey guys, welcome back. While Tommy finishes up the trim rings and center caps, I'm going to get the stripes laid out. Now there's a few different ways that you can do this. If you're going for a non-original look, then lay them out however you want. Just keep them symmetrical. But if you're going for a factory recreation of the originals, then there's a couple ways that you can do this. You can get a stripe kit, which is basically a big sticky template. Or you can use a picture of an original car and go with the measurement method, which is how I'll be doing it. The first step is to find the center of the hood by measuring both the back and the front. Use a soft tape measure to prevent scratches, and don't worry, the marks will come off with a little polishing compound. Mark the center line with 1/8" tape. Now this will be your main reference for laying out the stripes. The emblem is going back in place to use as a guide. Now when you're using pictures to help you lay out graphics, look for things like vents in the cowl, the distance to any emblems, and the distance in your body lines or curves. By looking at how the stripes run from the cowl vents in my picture, I know where they should start and how wide they need to be. I can also see how they're positioned around the emblem to get the correct length. Now looking at how the stripes follow the body lines on the hood will get me the rest of the way there. Now once I get the first stripe laid out, I'll take measurements to recreate it on the other side. This way, I know that they're going to be symmetrical. With the basic shape laid out, I can come back and mark the rounded corners using rolls of tape and sandpaper as templates. I'll run a line of 1/4" tape inside the original marks to create the outline of the outer stripe. This will be removed before I paint. Now next comes another strip of 1/4" tape inside the last one. This one marks the gap between the inner and outer stripes. Now I can remove the tape I laid to mark the outer stripe and mask it all up for paint. I sanded down all the big areas with 400 grit, then went back and hit all the edges with a red Scotch-Brite. Now if I was shooting these stripes like a high metallic silver, then I would have used something finer like a 600 grit and a gray Scotch-Brite. That way the sand scratches wouldn't come back through. But with the single stage black we're using on these, this prep will be just fine. Now we got it all scuffed up, masked up, now we're ready to lay down some black. When you're painting graphics on panels assembled to a car, make sure to mask inside all the gaps, where the black will travel under the masking paper and get all over the body and interior. After 2 coats, I got plenty of coverage. And here she is. After letting her sit for about 4 hours, I pulled all the masking off to reveal our new stripes. I'll tell you, I can really see why these things were a popular dealer option. I mean, they give the whole car a new attitude.
I got the trim rings and centers all finished up, then wrapped the wheels in a set of Firestone wide oval bias plies, just like it would have had when it was new. Coker Tire specializes in factory rubber, so they are the place to go if you want a stock looking tire. If you guys want more info on tires or anything else you've seen on today's show, or want to watch a full episode of MuscleCar online, check out PowerBlockTV.com.
Well, the exterior Project Limelight is looking awesome, and that means that we can turn our attention to the interior. But for this week, we're out of time, so until next time, we're out of here.
Hey guys, welcome to MuscleCar. We got a project sitting in the shop and it's been getting a lot of attention, and you can see why. Our 70 RS SS Camaro Project Limelight is sitting pretty sweet.
Now this is a stock style build with every performance option the 1970 had to offer, including a 375 horse big block, 12-bolt rear end, and heavy duty suspension. But it's still missing something that every car has to have, an interior.
Before the car was blasted, we pulled everything out. We don't plan to reuse very much of it because it's the wrong color and it's in pretty bad shape. But we did save the seats because we plan to refoam and recover them.
We're also replacing the whole wiring harness because we don't trust 40-year-old wires. Plus we're adding a full set of factory type gauges, so we need a different kind of setup. But before we put in any new parts, we need to cover up all this bare metal. Many GM cars came from the factory with no coating on the inside, but we want to give Limelight every bit of protection we can. So we're breaking out the Duplicolor. And since it'll be hidden under the carpet, it'll still look factory. Beautiful.
It's hard to get excited about wiring, but it's a step that you cannot afford to neglect. It runs under and through all the interior components, so it needs to go in while the car's still gutted. But no need to panic. Just take your time, go one step at a time, and it's really not that hard. Do yourself a favor and get the steering column completely out of the way. It will make this job much easier. I left the old harness in until the last minute so the routing and hookups will be fresh on my mind when putting the new one in. There are several points that attach the main harness to the car. Start by removing the fuse block, then look for any other clips, plugs, and brackets until the whole thing comes out in one piece. This area was covered up when the car was blasted, so it needs a little attention before the new harness goes in. Clean off the rust with a wire brush, hit it with some etching primer and semi-gloss black. A new firewall insulation mat will keep the engine noise down. With the mat in place, the new harness goes in using all the same mounting points as the old one. This is where using a quality OE style harness pays off. All the plugs and clips will match, so it's actually kind of hard to get it wrong. Wiring's awesome, you just got to take your time through it. It's really not all that big of a hassle or all that complex. Once the main harness is installed, you can run the body harness out back using the existing clips.
While Tommy gets a steering column put back in and gets the last few wires run, I'm going to get some dye laid down in all these parts. Now, some stuff you can order in the factory correct light saddle, which is the color that we chose for the interior. But other stuff you can only get in black, and that means you have to dye it. But before we do that, we've got to get all stuff prepped out. PPG designed a whole system just for cleaning non-metallic parts. It takes all the guesswork out of prepping everything from interior plastic parts to exterior flexible bumpers and body kits. The three-step system includes sealed, disposable applicators and a final spray-on adhesion promoter. Now you can use the OEM color codes to order the dye, but if you want an exact color match, then do like we did. We sent a whole door panel over to Auto Body Color and Supply, and they mix us up a custom batch so we know it's dead on. This stuff comes straight out of the can and ready to spray, so just dump it in, you're ready to go. Dye goes on a lot like base coat, so build it up in 3 or 4 thin layers. Once it looks covered, add one more coat. Now this is going to help longevity. For parts that get a lot of contact or abuse, like armrests and kick panels, you can add a layer of flat clear for extra insurance.
Coming up, Tommy installs a spiffy new set of gauges, and Rick makes our tired old Camaro seats super cozy and comfy.
There we go.
Hey guys, welcome back. Before we install that freshly dyed dash, we're going to assemble the gauge cluster. Classic Industries has all we need to swap out this basic old set with the deluxe gauges, and all we'll be reusing is a few pieces of hardware. This plastic assembly is over 40 years old, and it's obviously seen better days. Luckily, the most important pieces for us to save are the screws, since we're able to replace pretty much everything else. The new housing is the same as the old one, but what we're putting in it is not. To make the deluxe gauge set complete, we're adding a tack and clock, and the idiot lights are being replaced by actual gauges for water temperature and alternator. While you've got it all apart, this is a great time to change any old bulbs. These things aren't the easiest to change with the gauges in the car, so you could spend a few extra bucks on the front end and save tons of time later on. You spend a lot of time staring at the dash while you drive, so you might as well make sure it looks good. Not to mention, it's also one of the first things people see when they check out your interior. We're topping it all off with a new gauge bezel. The original one was just too far gone.
Now lot of the interior panels overlap the headliner, so what's got to go in next? Now, there are some one-piece molded headliners that are a little bit easier to install that you can get, but we want to keep this car all original, so we're going with the bow type. Now, this one from Classic Industries is available in the correct color, and it even has the original grain and pattern. We're reusing the factory bows, which need to be removed and installed in the new headliner in the same position that they were originally in the car. If you're reusing the original clips, beware. It doesn't take much to turn them into a pile of plastic shavings. In there. I'm marking the edges so I can be more precise with the application of the glue. With this perforated style headliner, it can actually bleed right through those holes to the visible side. It takes about 10 or 15 minutes for the adhesive to be ready to stick. A little bit of stretching and pulling and gluing. I got to come back here and trim this edge, roll it, finish gluing it in place. Pretty much there. Doesn't look too bad. Okay, now obviously there's still a few little wrinkles in it, but that'll all smooth out once it gets out in the sun and heats up. And if it bugs me too bad, I can always use a heat gun and kind of smooth it out that way too. But for now, it's pretty good. Hey guys, welcome back. While Tommy gets the back seat, carpet, and shifter installed, I'm going to tackle the front seats. I know a lot of you guys out there may think that this 80s upholstery job here is totally rad, but we need a stock type interior. The best way to do that is to recover the original frames. Now, Classic Industries has foam and covers that match the original style and colors. All you need is the bones to build off of. Now, it's real common for these seat frames to actually outlast the rest of the car, and even if they are a little damaged, they can usually be repaired. Now, before we get in this thing too deep, we need to get this old cover off and see what condition our frames are in. There it goes. Save all the little parts. Try not to break anything. The beauty of a kit like this is that you can recover your seats with the tools you already have lying around, plus a few bucks for a set of hog rigging pliers. At this point, you want to check for things like broken springs or cracked frames so you can repair any damage before you cover it back up. Our frames don't need any repair, but we still need to get rid of the rust. If you can't blast them, use a wire brush to clean them up. With the frames freshly blasted, we'll seal them up with some Duplicolor engine enamel. Now, normally these things aren't painted from the factory, but these are old, so they need all the rust protection that they can get. All right, now for the hard part, getting that new seat cover over the new foam. If your old foam is still in decent shape, well, you can go ahead and reuse it, maybe save yourself a few bucks. But odds are, especially on the driver's side, it's probably beat up pretty good. It's going to need to be replaced. Now start out by hog ringing the cover to the center of the seat foam, then work your way out. Putting on seat covers, like headliners or vinyl tops, is a whole lot of pulling and stretching. Just make sure the cover stays centered on the pad. The stitching lines will make it painfully obvious if it's out of alignment. That's looking pretty good. The seat back is similar to the bottom. Stretch it, hog ring it, stretch it, hog ring it, stretch it. Yeah, you get the idea. Now there are some areas where no amount of stretching is going to remove the wrinkles, and that's where batting comes in. Stuff it into the loose areas until they're nice and smooth. Then install the seat back cover. I also cleaned up the seat tracks and painted them, and now they're ready to install. Man, that's a good looking seat right there. Time to bolt this dude in. Look out, boss man, coming through.
Oh, hey man, that thing looks pretty good for a Bondo bandit like yourself.
Thanks. The rest of the interior doesn't look bad for a pushrod pansy.
Well, you know, man, I started off with a huge box from Classic Industries, including the carpet, rear panels, rear seat covers, console, and then I added the original style shifter Hurst sent us.
Yeah, it looks like you got the glass installed too, man. Looks good.
Yeah, neither one of us are done yet. We still gotta get the steering wheel and the door panels installed.
Yeah, and I still gotta finish the driver's seat, so I'm out.
We already stuffed the guts into the doors, so now we can cap them off with the door panels. We've even got some fresh shinies for that factory fresh look. And the cherry on top is a brand new steering wheel.
Heads up, man. Got the driver's seat done.
Cool, man. Set it in there. Let's check it out.
Hey, this interior's looking nice. Couple little details. We can call this dude done.
Yeah, but we're all out of time for this week. So until next week, y'all keep it between the ditches.
Hey guys, welcome to MuscleCar. Project Limelight here is coming into the final stages of the build. Our goal is to recreate an RSS 396 using all the options that we would have chosen if we had ordered it way back in 1970.
And when we're all said and done, this baby's not only gonna look factory fresh, but it's gonna drive just like it did back in the day. We started this OEM style build with a nice rust-free split bumper RS. Very little body work was needed before we hosed on the original GM citrus green. A 402 block was built up to the L78 396 specs and bolted up to a Muncie 4-speed.
The front end was upgraded to the F41 special suspension option using all factory spec bushings and parts. And we gave it a 12 bolt since this was the last year you could get one in an F-body. Then we made over the interior to look just like a 1970 Camaro should. Well, the engine's been installed, but it's not ready to fire up yet. We still need to bolt on a bunch of parts, like the carburetor and all the engine accessories. Then we can attend to a few details like the clutch linkage and wiring.
You don't have to remove the hood to do this, but we went ahead and snatched it off to give you guys a better look at what we're doing.
Now, L78 Camaros came with a very specific carburetor. While most F-bodies came with a quadrajet, we need a rare Holly for our application. And these things are not easy to come by. But the parts place specializes in factory correct reproduction carbs, and they hooked us up with this one. Now, this is kind of cool because if someone comes up and they're all like, "Hey man, what pound injectors are you running on your motor?" And you look at them and go, "Dude, I'm running a Holly. Back up." We nabbed our engine accessories from Classic Industries. Now, these are all reman parts made to replicate what would have originally come on an L78 Camaro. And they've got these kind of pieces for a ton of different builds.
The cooling components and wiring are all the same story. All this stuff is built to marry up together right out of the box. Sweet, no modifications necessary.
Need to double check because from the factory they use a resistance wire right here that actually cuts the voltage down to 6 volts instead of 12 so the points last longer. But we put in electronic ignition, so I need to double check and make sure it's not going to screw it up. All right, now this is why we go back and check stuff. Apparently it's okay to leave the ballast wire in place, but you do need to get your hot off a 12 volt source, not the 6 volt on the other side of the resistor. So that means I need to find myself a new 12 volt switch source. No biggie. With the radiator cover and fan shroud in place, that means we're done shoving big pieces into the engine bay. Time to take off these old pickup truck valve covers and swap them out for the correct chrome ones. I'll bet you thought we were going to leave these orange ones on, huh?
Well, sit down.
The plugs, distributor cap, and ignition wires are also stock OEM parts, right down to the original rubber booties. We're missing a few small things like wire separators and some hoses, but pretty soon, Limelight's going to be ready for the prom. Oh yeah. guys, welcome back. Got all the brackets mounted for the clutch linkage. I'm ready to drop in the Z-bar. Now all of these OEM style 4-speed conversion parts came from American Powertrain. And once I get all the stuff mounted, we'll get it up here in the rack, make some final adjustments so it engages and disengages in the right spots and doesn't cause any damage. Here's a peek at 1970s technology for you. Back when you didn't need a PhD in astrophysics to properly set up a clutch. Nowadays, when a manufacturer runs a manual transmission, the clutch system is all hydraulic, with a tiny little magical leprechaun who makes it all work. Hey, Tommy B.
Yes, sir.
Want to jump in the car and give me a hand adjusting the clutch?
I reckon. This old thing's pretty comfortable. You know, this thing in like a 4-wheel drive version wouldn't be too bad either. When you're adjusting the play in the clutch, it helps to have somebody that can sit in the driver's seat and run the pedal for you.
All right, Tommy, where are we at on the clutch?
It feels like you got clutch, but it doesn't feel like it gets good till almost at the floor.
Bring it all the way down again one more time.
Getting better.
Keep going. Keep going.
Yeah, it feels about right, Rick.
Cool, we're dialed. We ordered the correct exhaust for a big block from Classic Industries. Now this kit comes with a larger diameter pipe than what our original small block 307 used to breathe through.
These are made from aluminized steel, which would have been the material of choice back in the 1970s. Now it's Rick's turn to be the placeholder guy. He does a pretty good job.
I think it hangs a little low.
It's gonna sound awful.
It might scrape a little bit.
It's a good thing he's pretty knowledgeable about exhaust. This is what you call a transverse muffler. GM used this design for decades. The pony car sat really low to the ground, so they had to compensate for this by shoving the muffler up between the rear end and the gas tank.
We're reusing the factory hangers, which still fit this exhaust, even though the car came with a single tailpipe.
A little bit of wiggling is all it takes to get the pieces in place. The kit comes with all the OE style clamps to hold everything together. Just don't torque them down super tight until you have everything lined up where it's supposed to be. And voila, a factory correct exhaust system. We've got the exhaust all buttoned up and it's gonna look and sound real nice. The pieces are coming together on Limelight.
Yeah, we're getting dangerously close to taking her out for a maiden voyage, but we still have to hang a gas tank, the brake booster, bolt on a few shiny parts, and tighten up some loose ends. We started with a tired 1970 Camaro RS with a sad little 307 small block, a bargain barn paint job, and a mega rad 80s style interior.
We went out and found a rusty 402 in a barn, tore it down, sleeved it, built it up, and finished it with an L78 396.
After a little body work, we brought it back to its GM factory color, citrus green. Then we planted some stripes across the hood and deck.
With all new front and rear suspension, which replicates what a big block would have been sitting on out of the factory, air correct wheels and tires, gnarly 4-speed, and a light saddle interior that would make an angel sing. Limelight is dang close to being finished.
We're gonna get her buttoned down, topped off, and fired up.
But we've got to take care of some exterior trim, do a bit of wiring, and get that big block fired up before we can do that. So we better get to work.
And we've got the majority of the parts that still need to go on the car all laid out here in the blanket. And they're laid out in the same position that they need to go on the car. Now that's gonna save us some time from searching around trying to find stuff as we go. Now every part that we're not reusing is an accurate reproduction from year one.
We decided to reuse the grill bezel because it was one of the pieces that held up pretty well over time. Advanced plating made it look brand new again. Despite the SS package, most of the trim options are RS Camaro style.
These are the pieces that define the look of the car. There's a certain feeling of satisfaction that goes along with the final few components getting put in place.
Not to mention the anticipation that comes with being so close to being able to drive it. It takes a lot of man hours to turn an abused wad of steel back into a rolling piece of Detroit muscle. Ooh yeah, that's the money right there. Better than gravy and biscuit. And that mirror is nice, but the reflection is awesome. It can be pretty difficult separating the details from the RS package and what's supposed to come from the SS package. This car originally rolled off the assembly line with RS badging on the fender, but it's supposed to have the SS badging. We needed to come up with the correct SS emblems, so we gave Year One a call.
Now it's time to put emblems back on your car. There's a few different ways to do it. You can go to an old assembly manual and take it from there. You can find pictures of original cars and hope that they're correct, or you can find an original fender or panel and build a pattern off of that. Now the tape will usually run along a body line like this because that's a given. You know where that is. From there you can start, just make a little crease or mark with your fingernail or pen or whatever where the edge of the fender is, where your body lines are, and where the front edge of the fender is. Now that you know where your parameters are, where your edges are, you can go back and start marking your centers. Now this is a 350 car, not a 396, but at the very least the SS emblems will be in the correct position. And then you got a pattern that you know is correct. It doesn't get any more accurate than that.
Still to go, working out the Camaro kinks and pulling an all-nighter to bring a big block to life.
This makes no damn sense.
Hey guys, welcome back. Project Limelight is mere moments away from firing up for its first time, but that means we're working on the final details, which usually takes up a lot of time.
But that's how it is when you come into the home stretch of a build like this. You got to track little things down like wiring gremlins and beat them out of your car. Then we can top off the fluids, check for leaks, and hopefully fire this dude up. It's so nice working on older cars like this. You can actually reach all the bolts. I want a bell housing bolt right now.
Looking at how the PCV valves are routed.
Is the positive cable supposed to go under that motor mount or above it? Because I'm thinking it's supposed to go under it.
I figured. I really don't know what that is.
Yeah, it sure seems to fit awful nice running it that way.
Ouch! I'm popping in a couple of new U-joints. We decided to go ahead and reuse the stock dry shaft. We had to swap out the front yoke for the larger big block version. Now it's also a good time to double check your fluids. Empty. There ain't much worse than getting a couple miles down the road and realizing that you ain't got no gear oil in that rear end.
To all you weekend warriors out there that drive late model whatever, fill in the blank, during the week, keep in mind that the early transmissions here don't use ATF transmission fluid. This is back when the machining process in these things were about as rough as the people that shifted them. They need 90 weight gear oil, not ATF. So don't put ATF in a Muncie, you will destroy it. Stick your finger in there and the level should be just below that thread, and it's right there. So we got it. I like to add a dab of Loctite thread sealer just for insurance. Now guys, remember when you're starting a brand new motor, do your best to pre-fill the oil filter, because by doing this, that'll help prevent a dry start. It's a lot easier on the engine. Another mistake that a lot of guys make is once you get this thing cinched down to where that seal is just kissing the bottom of the block, don't turn it on there another 2-3 turns, you'll never get it off. All it needs is about a quarter of a turn, and that's it. Okay, go.
Yep.
Down?
Yep.
Okay, down. That's what you're watching for right there. See all those little air bubbles coming out? You crack it open, watch for any bubbles, and there wasn't a single bubble in there. That means that you got it. It's always a good idea to use brake-in oil when you first fire a new motor.
Now it's time to get her to move under her own power. And you can see what we have here is a whole lot of work to do. We're having a little engine trouble. Don't know if it's vacuum leak or distributor problem, or maybe possibly even carburetor. Okay. Go ahead. Stop. Pump it. Go again. Let's go again. Go ahead.
This little behind the scenes look doesn't always go smooth.
We were here late last night trying to get this thing tuned, and it wasn't working out at all. It's just one of those crazy kind of little deals. Can't quite figure it out.
Limelight's got an attitude.
It's making us work for it. I'm just gonna put the fuel in it. That way I know.
Wait a minute. Did you buy diesel? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, just checking.
It upsets the rings.
Warning, these guys are joking. Do not put diesel in your muscle car. You will make it very sad.
This is about the part where somebody usually says, "Hey y'all, watch this." Guess the timing's off, and so are my eyebrows.
Flames coming out of the carburetor mean that your intake valve is open in a cylinder when it gets sparked. Your ignition system and rotating assembly are plumb out of whack.
Using a timing light, you can tell how many degrees advanced or retarded your engine is timed. Rotating the distributor changes the point at which the plug fires.
That's timing.
Yeah.
All engines have a sweet spot for initial timing. L78s were happiest at around 4 to 6 degrees advanced.
The timing tab on this thing's off by like that much. Because you bring it down to where it's supposed to be, it won't even run.
Your problem can also be aggravated by other small issues, like having a mistuned carburetor.
At least it's letting us idle it down a little bit now. I'm starting to hear the cam lope a little bit.
Double checking your specs never hurts. Tuna, let's see, hot idle speed for this one, 700 actually. Looking up to actually see the correct tune or the timing spec on it, says it sets at 4 degrees before. Fuel front pressure, we checked that last night. It's supposed to be, we're sitting at about 5.5, and that's within. This kind of fix can be real tricky. Sometimes you don't know if you need to be adjusting the carb or the distributor.
As long as you keep making a little bit of progress at a time, then you know you're headed in the right direction. We're also dealing with a lot of components that can change the requirements of the motor by small amounts. A little here and a little there can add up pretty fast.
Just trying to figure out where this dude's gonna be happy. Well, we copied this thing as close as we could off of a L78. But at the end of the day, original L78 parts ain't easy to come by.
It starts too good. Timing ain't that far off.
Way back.
You can't ask for it to start no better than that. We looked hot and heavy trying to find the right air cleaner, but the best we could come up with was a Z28 version. And really, when you get down to it, that's the name of the game when you're doing a resto job.
Now guys, we know that we could have spent literally years tracking down every single little correct part for this car. Man, we wanted to build it and drive it. And besides, you can always swap out the incorrect parts for the correct ones as you find them. Now, if you have any questions about today's show, you can check it all out at PowerBlockTV.com.
The next time you see this ride, we'll be riding in it at the Good Guys Show. But we're all out of time for this week. So until next week, y'all keep it between the ditches.
Hey, I'm driving.
No, I'm driving.
No, I'll let you drive, but I'm driving this thing.
Flip you for it.
Flip me nothing.
We've had the chance to work on some pretty sweet cars on this show before.
And they've run the gamut from low-buck, do-it-yourself street cruisers
to asphalt thrashing, fire-breathing monsters that you could hardly keep the tires planted on. But Limelight here's a little different. What it lacks in over-the-top capabilities, it makes up for with purity, sophistication, and classic sensibility.
You know, Tom, I think this is about the most accurate restoration we've ever done on the show. I mean, we usually upgrade stuff like motors, transmissions, suspension, tires, all that, but I'll tell you what, dude, sometimes the old stuff is just cool.
Limelight's built with factory-style parts, but just because she's got old-school components, don't count her out when it comes to raw power.
One of the signature styling cues of a pony car is the long hood, short deck body style that they are often designed with. Now this results in a smaller car than most of the big models of the day, but it still has room for a big engine with big power.
This citrus green paint looks pretty nice out under the sun. It's got just enough metal flake for a nice subtle sheen. This shade's not only an accurate Chevrolet color of the day, but it's also a unique choice that gives this car a look all of its own.
Tommy's resto job on these wheels looks dead on. The polyglass rubber really completes that old school factory look we're going for. The trim options for the RS SS model bring a good deal of pizzazz to the table. With subtle complements of chrome and aggressive styling cues, you will not confuse this car for the base model.
And the L78 396 that we built for it cranks out plenty of power to push it right on down the road. It's chilling out in the ballpark of 375 horse. And for a car that's just a hair over 3,300 pounds, that ain't half bad.
No, dude, it's hard to beat a good old-fashioned big block and a 4-speed for just outright fun. I'm willing to bet there'd be a lot more of these dudes still around, but they've been street raced and beat up and they're running a bridge of buttons.
Which means when you got something like this, man, it's a shame to keep it locked up for no one to see. These things were meant to be driven and enjoyed. Well, I guess this thing's living proof that they knew what they were doing back in the day.
Yeah, they did. She was pretty old and tired and wore out when we got her, but I think she's up for going out and scaring the heck out of some hybrids.
Man, scare them. Heck, let's make some examples out of them.
Works for me.